This is Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. I am Osama Albini.
I'm Riv. I want you to know that if you don't believe in God, you're not alone. Right here in East Tennessee, you can find free-thinking atheists and agnostics. This is a show for them and for people committed to life rooted in science and unfettered by supernatural beliefs.
On today's show, as a vehicle to talk about the right to free speech, and in particular the right to blaspheme, we will review this history which is surrounding the Salman Rushdie affair and his book, The Satanic Verses.
But here we want to tell you viewers about the show.
We're going to be talking, I guess, about the sponsors.
Right.
So, the Atheist Society of Knoxville frequently has a fun meetup at a bar or eatery. Tonight's meetup is at Barley's in Old City, starting around 5:30. Look for the silver-jacketed copy of the God Delusion standing upright on a table. And as Matt Dillahunty at the Atheist Experience says, everyone is welcome to our happy hour for food, drink, and conversation. But if you plan to preach, proselytize, provoke, or punch, please don't.
The Rationalists of East Tennessee have several regular monthly meetings. The first and third Sunday mornings of the month, are regular lectures and lively roundtable discussions. The second Sunday, we hold a Skeptics Book Club. On the fourth Sunday, we are mixing it up. Sometimes it is a get-together we call a reflections meeting. It features a potluck lunch, and if someone's home. Sometimes we play board games, watch a movie, similar activities. Just last week, we had a picnic for the...
Well, I guess that is from a previous show.
All right. I'm going to do this.
So later in the show, we will give you our websites to visit for additional details, including times and location. So I guess we can move on to the topic of today's show.
So is blaspheming, is it a victimless crime, or is it?
Yeah, so we're wondering whether blasphemy is a victimless crime or not.
There's so much packed into that, right? Because you can't just, if you just tell someone that offends me, well, what are you really saying? You're attacking my worldview. You're maybe targeting something that I haven't thought about critically enough, and it's become so. I'd expected to walk on tender waters as it goes, and
True.
But there's so much that's not done. We just let something slide by that is doing so much harm around the world.
And it becomes part of society's norms to just expect that people cannot offend certain symbols or certain ideas, even though these, as ideas, should be available for criticism and should not be immune to any of that. So I guess today we're going to be starting with something that has to do with blasphemy directly, and we're going to be talking about the Satanic Verses, which is both a name of a book by the novelist Salman Rushdie, but also it has to do with an issue within Islamic history. So the topic itself, the book, has caused a great deal of ripples within within the Islamic world and beyond, and so many people have been killed or hurt in one way or another as a result of that. So probably this has to do also with history. So what do you think for Christianity?
Well, notes here as well is that Christianity in the West has undergone a lot of changes during the past centuries, especially causing it to have diminished influence in society and law. It did not disappear, but it's certainly far less than a few centuries ago. But that's not how things went for other religions such as Islam.
True, that's true. The Muslim world has pretty much lived throughout its history under one form of religious rule or another. And so up until the beginning of the 20th century, when World War happened, all Muslims were effectively under some form of religious rule, at least in the Arab world, and that's in the form of the Ottoman Empire. And as a result of that, it is extremely difficult to imagine a way of disentangling the Muslims from that outlook where religion is part and parcel of everyday life. And so it's really hard to imagine how Muslims would actually accept criticism, and it's really hard to see how this could happen. It's something that has accompanied Islamic history right from the beginning. If we go to the next slide, you would see that probably no, not this one. Actually the miniature that shows. Well, I was going to talk about an incident that where right from the beginning, the early history of Islam, there was a person by the name of An-Nadr ibn al-Harith, and he was actually someone who stood up to Muhammad and brought up some information. He was a very learned person and brought up many challenges to him. And the moment that Muhammad entered Mecca, after the invasion of Mecca, once he had enough power, one of the people who he had executed was An-Nadr ibn al-Harith. And this has been immortalized in a miniature. I was hoping that we can show it. It's an older painting. Well, we can skip that. It's not. That one behind me actually shows a depiction of Muhammad receiving revelation, where you have that winged angel.
Gabriel, wasn't it?
Yeah, supposedly Gabriel dictating the Quran to him.
We're here. Where'd it go? All right. Right. So, in context of this, is there something especially sensitive about criticizing Islam?
Right. So, probably the whole idea of blasphemy is not something that is specific to Islam. That's something you can expect in all kinds of religions where you have certain things that are considered holy or sacrament, and people do not criticize them. But in the case of Islam especially, Islam is vulnerable to that, and Muslims do not expect you to criticize, because the moment that you criticize, you're actually trying to undermine some of the basis of what they have. This started from the beginning of the religion, where Muhammad himself was faced with a lot of criticism, a lot of ridicule, and that's something that is recorded in the Quran. And so right from the beginning, when he started trying to abolish all kinds of other religions, there were Christians and Jews, but also some idolaters. He wanted his religion to be the only one. And so any kind of criticism was especially detrimental to his cause, and so it was dealt with very harshly, like in that case of that guy that got executed. But it's not the only one, it's not the only person that Muhammad actually went after and killed eventually.
Well, I guess what about today? How are we perceiving today? How are we reacting to it today, you think?
Mm-hmm. Well, in today's world, there is globalization, and Muslims are not isolated anymore as they were in the previous centuries. And so in that age of communication, where one person saying something in one part of the globe, it's very easy to have that receiving some kind of response or some echo elsewhere. And so Muslims do react to that, and they do react to it in mass. So one person saying something critical of Islam in one part of the world, you see immediately that a lot of people react to it a lot, as in the case that we're going to be discussing today, but also in other cases. So, for example, today, not only are we talking about people like Salman Rushdie, but there is a prominent Egyptian German scholar who is now doing a lot of criticism, and he has a weekly show on YouTube. His name is Hamid Abdus Samad, and like Rushdie, he has received threats, and he's now under guard. And it's very hard for him to move, even though what he's doing is just academic criticism.
Well, you know, the Charlie Hebdo massacre comes to mind. It was some odd. It was the cartoon resulted in 12 shootings in headquarters of the weekly newspaper.
Yeah, it's a really unfortunate thing when you see that mere cartoons that are basically not directing any serious damage to anybody, just criticizing certain aspects of religion, and in many ways they were actually not as critical as some of the Muslims consider, but because they don't even look at the cartoons, at their content, they think that they were directing ridicule at Islam. And so even though that event was owned by Al-Qaeda and was perpetrated by someone who eventually said that they belonged to them, there was a great deal of prelude to that, with protests and people going to the street and trying to demand that some kind of action, some kind of violent action essentially, be taken against those people at Charlie Hebdo.
Well, the Satanic Verses is a literary novel, caused similar reactions some 30 years ago. And even though things have calmed down a bit, seems like a business end, not yet so. So start beginning to know the writer. So here's what some of the Wikipedia says about him. Rushdie is a British Indian novelist and essayist born in India in 1947. His second novel, Midnight's Children, 1981, won the Booker Prize in 1981. So pretty quick. Much of his fiction is set on the Indian subcontinent. He combines magical realism with fiction, with historical fiction. His work is concerned with many connections, disruptions, and migrations between Eastern and Western civilization. And I guess when his troubles start, and we've got a phone calling in.
Well. Hello, caller.
Hello.
Can we please have your name or nickname that you'd like to use?
Well, caller would be fine.
What?
I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
Caller would be fine.
Okay, caller. So, are you a local?
Yes.
Oh, so you're probably someone who views this show often.
Yes.
Okay, that's great. So, what is the question?
Well, it's not really a question. It was sort of an observation that you haven't mentioned yet that I thought was pretty important or interesting. And you're talking about, should blasphemy be illegal? The United Nations has already tried to push through several laws and have even passed some committees to make blasphemy illegal, to make it a crime. So when it comes in the United States, we probably can't have blasphemy laws because of the freedom from religion type thing. But if you're looking at the United Nations passing a law, they've already tried it several times, and so far it hasn't passed a vote. But if it does pass, then Salman Rushdie would have not a leg to stand on as far as being convicted or prosecuted under United Nations.
Well, at the time when Salman Rushdie brought up this whole issue, some people in Britain tried to invoke a law that was already instituted there about blasphemy, because blasphemy laws in Britain do exist, and they do exist also elsewhere. For example, just last year, I think, or the year before, in Germany, somebody was convicted as a result of that. I think a school teacher or something of that sort. So these laws do exist. It's that they have been essentially, as far as my view goes, they have been superseded or have been frozen and suspended in some sense I'm not sure about England if the law still stands, but at the time when this happened, Muslims did try to prosecute Rushdie based on blasphemy laws, which were still in effect at the time in England.
Ah, okay. Well, I don't know if they pass, if the United Nations does pass a law regarding blasphemy, making a crime. Could I be convicted for saying, you know, the GD phrase, or, for that matter, God bless America?
I don't know. It's very hard to consider that as something that could pass. I mean, in so many ways, it's something that conflicts with the spirit of the human rights and many of the principles of the United Nations. It's so hard to see that being materializing on the ground. What do you think?
Well, it kind of reminds me of more closer to home in the same spirit. You had the Starbucks thing that happened, and it was this whole hubbub about some of my friends. They hold the notion that, they say jokingly, but I think it's more facetiously, I don't know, about, oh, well, they hate Starbucks hates Christians, but no, that's not even the case. If you close yourself into, anyway. But yeah, it's something that's so systemic. And
well, I've also heard of this whatever crime, or I guess it's a religious crime, of using God's name in vain. Now, how does that relate to blasphemy?
Well, I guess in one sense or another, each society has its own view on what is religious or not, on what is sacred or not, and I suppose that's something that comes from Judaism, because Jews themselves cannot really say the word Yahweh, and usually replace it with something else like Elohim, Elokim, Hashem. They have several words that they use in order to avoid using that word, which is supposedly a sacred word that is not something that they should use, as opposed to the case of Islam, which inherited all of this. It's actually a very good thing for Muslims to repeat the word Allah and use that in conversation, in prayers, in everything that they use. I guess it's a cultural thing eventually.
So if you compliment God or flatter him, that would not be blasphemy, but if you criticize him, that is blasphemy.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so now if you use the phrase, God bless America, now using God's name in vain means using it for a worthless purpose.
Well, also, I'll say there's more context to it, from what I understand. It's not just, saying the phrase together. It's also doing things in acts which would otherwise, oversimplifying the word, displease God. That would be doing something in vain, and so on and so on. But it's taken out of solely to say the GD, and that's just seems to be the rhetoric around most of the world in some cases.
So displeasing God would be blasphemy too.
That's how someone he's a minister, and so he's telling me these things, and I've read a little bit into it. It makes sense.
Okay. Well, thanks for the information. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Have we answered your question?
I don't know. I'm not really sure what blasphemy is, to tell you the truth. I mean, it's being critical, huh? Displeasing God. Well, as far as displeasing God, you could do a census improperly, and that could displease God. Or
yeah, the concept of blasphemy eventually boils down to a cultural thing, a political thing, a social thing. It's not simply or purely a religious issue.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. Well, let some other people call in on their opinion of blasphemy. Oh, by the way, now, if you believe in God, you can commit a crime against God. If you didn't believe in God, how does that work? I mean, for example, a Christian probably would not consider themselves blasphemous if they said something bad about Allah. So could you really commit blasphemy if... yeah, I guess you could. you're just pissing people off.
Yeah.
Well, exactly. If you pick one religion or another, and you don't believe in any of them, then it seems to be kind of neutral. But from the worldview of someone who cherishes that deeply, then it's kind of like a perpetual, what is it? Kind of like an inverse ratio of the Dunning-Kruger effect. You just assume, well, of course everyone knows this is blasphemous. I mean, we'll know.
Yeah, and if you want to look at the way that Muslims, for example, every day, actually 17 times a day, they recite a prayer that actually curses in one way or another the Christians and the Jews, and so saying something about what their beliefs is not considered blasphemous, even though they are supposedly believing in the same God. I guess it's an issue of picking what you want to consider blasphemy and what you don't want.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm looking forward to Reverend Al calling in and letting us know what blasphemy is, and probably accusing y'all of doing that. We'll talk to you later. Thanks for the show.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so let's get back to the topic that we were considering. We said that Salman Rushdie started with several books, and one of his novels, Midnight Children, actually won a lot of acclaim in Britain and received awards. In 1988, he published his fourth novel, and that novel was entitled Satanic Verses. Now, 1 year after that, he found himself the subject of a fatwa by the Ayatollah Khomeini, the supreme leader of Iran, and this fatwa was calling basically for his death, his assassination by Muslims.
Well, the name you just mentioned, maybe less familiar. What exactly is a fatwa?
Right. So,
Butchering the name.
Yeah, that's probably one thing that we need to talk about. The term fatwa is one that comes often today in the news. So a fatwa is basically a religious ruling issued by a Muslim scholar, usually a scholar that has certain credentials. But once it is issued, it becomes binding, essentially becoming part of the Sharia, so that the followers of that specific sect, usually it's not meant for the sect, but it's meant for the entire Muslims, but it's usually a sect that follows that, they start following that fatwa. And so from the point when Al-Khomeini issued that fatwa, it had repercussions beyond the bounds of Iran, and even though he was a Shiite cleric, many of the people started looking into the issue of the book, and Salman Rushdie essentially became a fugitive.
So, death sentence issued in absentia by an Islamic religious leader affecting a British novelist, an Indian novelist. That sounds pretty surreal. I mean,
it is. Once you look at how everything came together, how these elements came together, and eventually he became persecuted by many Muslims. It's weird. Now, many Muslims started actually reacting to it. Many angry Muslims started calling the publisher, trying to force them to withdraw the book. And there was a famous protest where some Muslims, after a Friday prayer in 1988, they burned the book, and many instances happened where bookstores in both the UK and the US were bombed or burned down. And following that, several countries started banning the book, and even before the fatwa, like Sudan, South Africa, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. But others actually followed suit after that. One case that stands out, I think it was 1992 or 93, was when a bunch of intellectuals in Turkey gathered together in a hotel for a conference, and one of the people over there was a guy who was proposing to translate and publish the book in Turkish. There was a mob outside the conference, and they were protesting that idea. Eventually, the hotel was burned down, and 37 people died as a result of that fire. And so it was a big deal for quite a few years.
Well, as for Rushdie himself, was he harmed? What came of him afterward? How did he react? You know?
Well, he was certainly terrified. I mean, the idea of having so many people coming after you, basically trying to get you, and he realized the gravity of this situation and issued a kind of an apology to the Muslims right after that, in order to minimize the damage. And right after the death of Khomeini, which was just 1 year after the fatwa was issued, he wrote an essay also trying to appease the Muslims, but that didn't actually change things.
So is that fatwa still in place now? No.
Yes and no. In one way, they backed down diplomatically from the fatwa after the Khomeini was dead, because after he was dead, other people came ruling Iran, and one of the people was Khatami, who was a reformer, and he said that Iran was no longer trying to kill Rushdie, but the fatwa itself was not rescinded, so it still stands until today.
So, in light of that, is he more received by the Muslims now?
Absolutely not, unfortunately. He's still considered as an evil person, and many Muslims attack him. Scholars have written books against him, demonized him, and he's definitely not accepted in many Muslim countries. He's considered a persona non grata, so he can't even visit there.
So it sounds pretty damning. So what's the deal with this book? What's so disruptive about it?
Well, there are several things. First of all, the plot itself talks about a fictitious world. It's set in the modern world, but it's talking about a world that is very similar to Mecca at the time of Muhammad. And he uses terminology that is very offensive to Muslims when referring to Mecca. So, for example, he uses the word Jahiliyyah to refer to Mecca after Muhammad. Jahiliyyah is a word that is used by Muslims to refer to the age of ignorance before Islam. He uses many names that come directly from the life of Muhammad. For example, Jibril and Saladin, who came after as a Muslim leader. All of them are considered in a dark light, not exactly as positive characters. Muhammad himself is referred to using a name that was used in English in the Middle Ages to demean him, Mahmud. All of these and some references to the wives of Muhammad as prostitutes. He doesn't actually talk about these wives themselves, but he uses the same names and they're used as prostitutes in the novel. So all of these together refer to the entire thing in a negative light. And then comes the plot itself around the Satanic Verses. Now, these verses are supposed to be things that Muhammad used in order to appease the Quraysh. These are the tribe where people wanted to have some form of alliance with Muhammad, to try to include their gods into Islam. And one day he came up with a verse that commended 3 of their goddesses. And so afterwards he found himself realizing that he shouldn't have done that. He is actually eroding the monotheism that he was proposing, and tried to retract these verses and referring to them as verses that came from Satan. That's where the whole term comes in. Now, many people have said then, well, if these verses came from Satan, how do we know if the rest of the Quran itself was not revealed to Muslims through that kind of agency? And so it casts a whole shadow of doubt on the entire thing, and puts Muhammad as someone who was trying to just appease his people and compromise monotheism. And so that novel is set into this kind of environment, and you can imagine how this can be viewed as offensive to Muslims.
I remember reading that part of this, how it was it was pagan gods could be appeased to for intercessory prayer, and you can't have that.
Mm-hmm.
So, what's the deal? Well, there's plenty in this book that definitely could be ridicule and blasphemy, but to have lost lives over it, and the rights of free speech threatened so much, it seems a bit absurd.
Absolutely. It's really unfortunate that this thing is not a passing thing. I mean, we mentioned the Charlie Hebdo, but there was the other case of the Danish cartoons that might not have received as much attention. Also, some people have been threatened as a result of that. And so it's just a symptom of something that's going on beyond that affair itself. You can understand how the fact that the Muslim world has been isolated from the rest of the world and has not been exposed to the values that Christianity underwent when the Renaissance and the Enlightenment happened. And so what we're seeing is a result of that clash of civilization in light of globalization and the age of communication. And so we should expect, unfortunately, more things of that sort. Something like ISIS, for example. That's a manifestation of that kind of thing.
Can we hear a sample of that offensive text, if you have any, to get a taste what it's all about?
Right. So we'll finish with this now,
Okay.
And then move on to something else. So the following relates the scene where Muhammad, or the person name of Mahund in the novel, is contemplating an offer by Mecca for a compromise to include their gods with Allah. So Mahund sits on the edge of the well and grins. "I've been offered a deal." By Abu Simbel, Khalid shouts, "Unthinkable, refuse." Faithful Bilal admonishes him, "Do not lecture the messenger." Of course he has refused. Salman the Persian asks, "What sort of deal?" Mahmud smiles again. "At least one of you wants to know." "If our great God could find it in his heart to concede," he used that word, concede, "that only three of the 360 idols in the house are worthy of worship. There is no God but God," Bilal shouts. And his fellows join in. "Ya Allah." Mahmud looks angry. Will the faithful hear the messenger? They fall silent, scuffing their feet in the dust. He asks for Allah's approval of Lat, Uzza, and Manat. In return, he gives his guarantee that we will be tolerated, even officially recognized, as a mark of which I am to be elected to the Council of Jahiliyyah. That's the offer.
Is that close remotely to how the stories are counted in Islamic sources?
It is a dramatization, but it's close. So I guess we can take a break now.
Okay.
And are questioning your religious beliefs, or simply believe in one less God than everyone else? Well, you're not alone. The Atheist Society of Knoxville is a fun and friendly group of people just like you that meets twice a week at a bar or restaurant. We meet every Tuesday night following the show at Barley's Tap Room and Pizzeria for happy hour. You'll find our group either inside or on the patio. Look for Richard Dawkins' silver-jacketed book, The God Delusion, standing upright on the table. On Fridays, we meet at Agave Azul or the Beard and Beer Market. But if you plan to preach, proselytize, provoke, or punch, please don't. We all question what we believe at one point in our lives. If this is the time for you, come join us for food, drink, conversation, and fun. Do you find stories of talking snakes laughable? Do you prefer the scientific method over supernatural beliefs? Are you concerned about religious leaders and organizations imposing their values and rules on your body, your family, and the rest of our society? Well, take comfort in the fact that you're not alone. The Rationalists of East Tennessee meets weekly for fellowship and provides a forum for people who support skeptical thinking and rational discussion of these and other issues. To find out more information or to find out about our next meeting, visit us on the web at www.rationalist.org. If you live in or around the Knoxville area and are questioning
seems that the quality of the audio is somewhat inferior today for some reason. We apologize for that, and we hope that the problem has been fixed.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
Okay, so Salman Rushdie today is basically living and teaching, and he just wrote a novel last year. In fact, he teaches at Emory University in Georgia, and but he travels a lot. So I guess that's it about this topic of Salman Rushdie. I hope that it has been informative. Now let's do a news item. RET is organizing its second annual Freethought Advance. Unlike religious who go on retreats, our event is an advance. This two-day event is September 3rd and 4th, which is the Saturday and Sunday of Labor Day weekend. Out-of-town participants can then have Monday off to explore the Great Smoky Mountains and other attractions of our beautiful area. The advanced location is Tremont Lodge and Resort in Townsend, Tennessee. You can visit the website at rationalist.org. That's rationalists.org to find out more and to register.
And we have some information on the speakers of the advance and their bios we'd like to share. So we have Matt Dillahunty, who is he's the owner and founder of Iron Chariots Wiki, an atheist debates project, he's commonly known, hosts the Atheist Experience in more than a decade, former president of Atheist Community of Austin, and a popular debater and educator. Let's see here. And a skeptic, humanist, magician, jack of all trades. This list goes on.
Yeah. So the next one is Sincere Kirabo. Sincere Kirabo is the Social Justice Coordinator at the American Humanist Association. Sincere is the longtime humanist activist who writes about atheism, culture, humanism, and social issues from an intersectional approach. His work can be found on The Humanists, Everyday Feminism, and Pathos, amongst other media.
I also have Shannon Nebo, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, is the co-founder and president of Be Secular, an apparel company that promotes secularism and humanism with branding, image, and donations to secular organizations, and the treasurer of Recovering from Religion, an organization that provides resources and support for people in doubt and transitioning away from religion. She is a mother, feminist, atheist, and humanist with 2 children who feature frequently in her activism, which focuses especially on science advocacy, education, separation of church and state issues, and secular values.
John D. Webster is a stand-up comedian and the author of 5 books, which include Nothing Sacred, An Atheist Quote a Day, Calendar Blasphemy, Atheist Quotes, and Essays by an Apostate. Unreal News, a collection of satire, 10 Decisions I Could Have Made Better Than God, and other audacious atheist articles, and One Big Joke, and 300 shorter ones. Many times John is asked when he discovered a talent for writing, and the answer is in the 8th grade when John, school principal, held a contest for the students to write a pledge to their school, and John's pledge ended up winning. New Hope Christian School now has a pledge to their school, which their students recite every morning, written by the author of 5 atheist books.
We also have Osama Albini, born. Hey, that's you.
No, I'm sure that's a common name.
Oh yeah, it's a big world out there. Born and raised in Jordan to a modern Sunni family, studied physics in Jordan and then in the U.S., where he obtained his Ph.D. in theoretical physics. Usama left Islam during the late teens, about 20 years ago, but went through several stages before he became an atheist. In recent years, he has come to realize the importance of activism and has committed to it. Usama is an active in the Arab ex-Muslim community, where he helps run the Arab Atheist Network, the Arab Atheist magazine, and is a member of the Atheist Alliance of Middle East and North Africa.
Patrick Horst is a former missionary kid who speaks Italian, Spanish, Arabic, Modern Standard Arabic and Levantine, Sicilian, and some German. His background is Mennonite, Amish, and pacifist, but he is currently on active duty in the U.S. Army. He is a combat veteran and a member of Military Atheists and Secular Humanists, MASH, of Fort Campbell. He's also a communications and PR director at Sunday Assembly Nashville, where he was a founding band member in 2013, playing guitar and bass. He is the father of 2 children he is raising with their Christian mother. His talk is the product of repeatedly getting asked the tiresome question, "So you don't believe in anything?" His search for response led him through 5 years of research and reflection. The result is a coherent values system, which he has sharpened into an elevator pitch to help explain his humanist principles. Using his personal values system as just one example, participants will receive useful advice on how to articulate their own answers to these questions. Is it even possible to be moral, upstanding person of character without righteousness of religion? What ethical reasoning guides your decisions? As a nun, what values give your life meaning? Is it time for new humanism?
And also Karen Park is a retired middle school art teacher who makes it very clear how easy and ethical it is to keep church and state separation in the classroom. She manages to sneak in lots of humorous anecdotes from her 30 years in the art room wherever she gives this presentation.
Herb Silverman. He's a long-time activist in the Freethought movement and will describe his journey from Orthodox Jew raised in Philadelphia to mild-mannered math professor to accidental activist atheist when he moved to South Carolina. He'll talk about his challenge to the South Carolina Constitution and his Supreme Court victory, which paved the way for allowing atheists to hold public office in South Carolina. He'll also talk about his political activism and coalition building, including his adventures with the likes of Billy Graham and Jimmy Carter.
And our own Leah Ledendecker, the founding member of Rationalist East Tennessee, a humanist celebrant with the Humanist Society, a volunteer for Sunday Assembly Knoxville and Sunday Assembly International, director of the new East Tennessee chapter of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, a retired Montessori teacher and teacher trainer, and an organizer for the 2nd annual Smoky Mountain Freethought Advance. And the always entertaining Freethought Jeopardy with Martin and Cheryl Lewison.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we still have a few minutes left now, and we'd like to maybe discuss a few things about what caused that fatwa to be issued against Rushdie. It's not really clear what instigated Al-Khomeini to issue that fatwa. He died not long after that happened. and many people have speculated actually about what kind of motivation there was. Now, we have to remember that Al-Khomeini was a Shiite, and the Shias are just a minority amongst Sunnis, relatively speaking, and they're relatively concentrated in Iran, Iraq, some parts of Lebanon, but they're basically scattered throughout. And some people said that there has been some connection with that schism that exists between Sunnis and Shiites. And what they're saying is that Al-Khomeini wanted to actually gain more attention towards the Shiites, show that there is some kind of leadership that they have attained. And but they also connected to some other things, internal politics, that they wanted to bolster that and the strength of the revolution. The revolution at the time that led Iran to where it was merely a decade old, and before that Iran was a very liberal country, an ally of the West. And so that was one way of perhaps showing their strength in the country. But another has to do with what was happening elsewhere in neighboring Afghanistan, where the Soviets were withdrawing from Afghanistan after a long war. And that war was the war that probably spawned, in some sense, Al-Qaeda, because the Mujahideen that were fighting over there, backed unfortunately by the West at the time, fighting as freedom fighters, eventually turned into becoming Al-Qaeda. And so Saudi Arabia, the Sunni Saudi Arabia, and the U.S., Afghanistan were all very jubilant about what was happening. Were very happy that they finally were victorious over the atheist, godless Soviets. And so probably at that time, Al-Khomeini wanted to get some of the limelight by issuing that fatwa at that very time, because it came exactly at that period of time when the Soviets were withdrawing from Afghanistan. And it's a little bit interesting that the fatwa came out on Valentine's Day, so it was like a love gift directed towards Salman Rushdie. So it's a one-time thing. As far as I know, there was nothing that was issued by a leader in the modern world, at least on the side of Muslims, to assassinate someone simply because of some blasphemous activity like that. And it doesn't seem to have been causing consequences as far as something similar. However, it has left free speech and the entire enterprise of promoting free speech in a state where people now are wary about doing something similar. Very often today you would find people doing some self-censorship, stopping themselves from actually publishing or writing something that could be construed as blasphemous, especially when it comes towards Muslims. And in that sense, there's a writer, a British writer of Muslim descent, I forgot his name right now, who once described that event as something that is truly pivotal, one of the biggest events in 20th century literature, where you have some novel that eventually ended up doing so much essentially damage to free speech, and also showing what kind of situation people are in as far as blasphemy is concerned, as far as interaction with populations of Muslim descent in the West, how these things can essentially snowball and turn into something that can get out of control. So many different things can happen as a result of that.
Well, it kind of reminds me, now it's some years back, There's been a lot of episodes I haven't seen. I haven't seen hardly any episodes of them, but some come to mind of South Park.
Mm-hmm.
And Matt and Trey, or whoever the two people who are, I remember reading some commentary that it's for that very reason that they're like the honey badger. They don't they don't give a shit. They don't they do right. So honey badger, right? But when they're writing things for the show, when it comes to things dealing with Islam, they're all hands-offy and, well, maybe we shouldn't do this. I mean, it's so profound when you're thinking of a show that has no boundaries and comes up against this one thing and skirts around it. I mean, that's pretty profound if you think about it.
Absolutely. I mean, you see the way that Jesus is dealt with in that show or other similar contexts, and there is no sanctity, and I mean, it's definitely something that is causing a lot of people to be careful about the way that they say things, about the way they phrase things, but there is a problem, and it has to be dealt with. I mean, it's not just that there is a sensitivity that needs to be dealt with. The fact that there is violence right now being perpetrated in the name of a religion, and that there is a context for that, it has to be dealt with in a way that both problems are addressed in some sense. So we cannot just ignore it and say, well, we cannot deal with that, or we cannot look at it. It has to be dealt with in some sense, and we have to be brave in one way or another. Criticism of religion is something that should be a right, and not something that is a luxury. That doesn't mean that one should go out hurting people's feeling on purpose, but there are problems, and they have to be dealt with seriously.
Right. I guess a thought here, just before we start the closing bit. That is the impacts of keeping silent when maybe someone should say something. If you get to the situations, one's offended, one's not. Mm-hmm. But I think in as polite a way as is feasible, but it shouldn't be ignored. That definitely needs to be spoken up about, because it has systemic impact if you just let it go, and we see what's happened because of that.
True. Okay, I guess we need to close the program now. It's time to start wrapping up. Get your pen and paper. This has been Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee.
Please send us feedback. Leave voicemail at 865-272-9060, or email us at freethoughtforum@yahoo.com.
You can see this show on Tuesdays from 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern Time on this Knoxville station, and at 10 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time at ctvknox.org.
The opinions expressed on this show and the hosts of the guests the hosts of the guests are not any official opinion of ASK or RET. We'd like to thank Sam, our technical support, and the staff of CT Knox, and all our viewers and callers.
Nuns, those who identify with no religion, are the fastest growing religious group in America. Right here in East Tennessee, the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee are places you can find fellowship and fun. You
are not alone.